welcome to today's webinar. So we're going to be looking at the missing link, why supplier engagement is crucial for your sustainability strategy. Our webinars are open to everyone. So if anyone hasn't heard of the Institute of Sustainability Studies before, we are a sustainability training organization, empowering businesses to build capability across their entire operations, not just within sustainability teams. So we offer a variety of different courses, from our 12-module diploma to short certificate courses, and even bite-sized learning for entire organizations as well. So jumping into today's session, so it will be 45 minutes, and we'll be looking at a critical yet often underdeveloped area of sustainability strategy, and that is supplier engagement. So while many organizations have set ambitious Scope 3 targets and ethical sourcing commitments, translating these into meaningful supplier action often still remains a significant challenge. So we'll be looking at this and how to move beyond compliance-led approaches towards more collaborative, value-driven supplier relationships to unlock real impact across your supply chain. So I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker today, which is Grania McIver. So Grania is an environmental analyst at YVR Vancouver International Airport, where she is supporting environmental and sustainability initiatives across complex operational systems. But Grania also brings a wealth of experience from her previous role as sustainability manager at Homestorm Moore, as well as other consultancy work where she supported organizations of all sizes on climate strategy development and embedding ESG considerations into business practice as well. With that being said, I'll pass it over to Grania, and I hope you all enjoy today's session.
Welcome, everyone. So today, for the webinar, the learning outcomes are, and I suppose Rona kind of went through these, but essentially why it's central to Scope 3 emissions reduction, how to transition to collaborative value-driven supplier partnerships, identify practical approaches to improving your supplier data quality, accountability, ESG reporting, common risks like supplier fatigue, greenwashing, over-reliance on self-disclosure, and apply structured engagement strategies that strengthen resilience, compliance readiness, and long-term business value. So I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about Scope 3. So what is it and why do you need your suppliers for it? So we talk about organizational carbon footprinting. It's typically emission sources are split into three different categories or scopes of emissions. So you have your Scope 1 emissions, which is all emissions within your direct control. You've got your Scope 2 emissions, which is indirect emissions due to electricity. And then Scope 3 is the other category. And it's all of your indirect emissions within Scope 3. So, for example, business travel is in Scope 3. Obviously, Ryanair is the one who owns the plane. They're the one putting the jet fuel in the plane. But emissions are happening. You are accounting for some emissions because you are sending your employee on that flight. So Scope 3 is quite broad. It covers about 15 different categories, although not all of them are going to be relevant to every single company. But really to be able to get good data for Scope 3 and also to be able to drive reductions in Scope 3, there are emissions that aren't in your direct control. So it involves engaging with your suppliers. And this is just a list of the different categories in Scope 3. So for example, purchase goods and services, that's what you're buying from your suppliers. So you would need to do engagement there. Transportation, distribution, another supplier you might have to engage with. And for Scope 3, it's going to vary by sector. But oftentimes Scope 3 can be the largest source of emissions for a company. Now, obviously it varies. Like if you're a steel manufacturer and you're burning a lot of fossil fuel to produce that product, your Scope 1 emissions are going to be higher. But for example, if you're in construction and you're buying that steel, that's part of your indirect emissions, all the emissions it takes to extract the raw material, process, manufacture it up until it reaches the gate of your organization. So that ends up being your Scope 3, which means that your Scope 3 is going to be a lot higher than your Scope 1 and your Scope 2. And you'll see this for different organizations. So retail, for example, is another one where Scope 3 is going to be much, much higher than your Scope 1, Scope 2, because it's all the emissions it takes to make those products and get them to you versus, keeping lights on in a store. So here is an example from Microsoft and their carbon footprint. And that off. Their carbon footprint. So if you look at this here, um, their scope one emissions and scope two emissions is only about 3% of their footprint. So scope one is like natural gas combustion, maybe fuel combustion if they've got company vehicles, things like that. Lead refrigerants from there. If they have like heat pumps or coolers or anything like that. Scope two is their electricity. So this is all their kind of operational, typically energy emissions, and that's only 3% of their overall footprint. The rest of their footprint is all in their scope three, and a good portion of that, so about 77%, I think it is, of this one and two chunk is the emissions for the things that they buy. So whether that's materials to make their actual products or whether that's capital equipment and infrastructure to um, company infrastructure to kind of make that. But it's all of this here is the actual emissions it takes to buy the products that they buy, basically that they need to buy. Um, so obviously, if Microsoft have net zero targets that they're going towards, and scope three is included within those targets. So to be able to actually influence or make any kind of real meaningful change in their scope three, that's going to take engagement um, with their suppliers. And yeah, I suppose one thing to talk about in your scope three with the methods of calculation is you don't necessarily have to start off from the very start engaging with suppliers. So you can start off with what you have. So for example, if you have spend-based data, there are emission factors out there for um, emissions per euro spent or whatever it is. And you can use those emission factors to get a picture of what your footprint actually looks like to start off with in your scope three. However, this chart here is quite good because even though it's low on the difficulty of method, it's also low on the level of accuracy or relevance. So you can get a number from doing spend-based emissions and doing a calculation method that way. Um, but if you try to make any meaningful change, like if you try to move to a supplier that's maybe lower carbon or better, um, that might not be reflected in your spend-based emissions because it's just based on the euro value. And if anything, maybe you're paying more for something that's more sustainable on occasion. So that would come up as higher in spend-based emissions when actually it should be lower. So in terms of the level of accuracy versus the difficulty of method, it is more resource intensive to reach out to suppliers to get data um, to calculate your scope three, but it is more accurate. There's, I suppose, nothing more accurate than the actual real-time information of what your supplier is doing. And yeah, this is just another example of explaining kind of that as well. So when it comes to scope three, when it comes to other environmental matters, I mean, it really is start with the data that you have to get started. Um, but top of the, I suppose, accuracy or ultimately where you want to go is you want actual data from your suppliers. Yeah, and I know I've just talked a bit, about scope three there as well, for a good bit. And what I will say on scope three is, so carbon is the issue that it's probably the most sophisticated when it comes to the environmental issues for organizations. Like the standards are quite well known, and a lot of companies measure that before they measure anything else. But don't get too caught up in just looking at carbon when it comes to your suppliers. If carbon, if if most of your carbon impact is in your scope three or is in your supply chain, chances are that's also the case for every other environmental issue. And then also not just environmental issues, so also social issues as well. So, for example, here, um, water, maybe you buy certain products that are quite water intensive. Pollution, maybe you have dyeing processes within your supply chain, and is that wastewater being disposed of correctly? Are the chemicals safe? Deforestation, so for example, maybe you're sourcing soy or you're sourcing beef, um, and are they being sustainably sourced essentially? Is that are they leading to deforestation? So um forest land to primary agriculture land, or sorry, primary forest land to agriculture land. Packaging. So I mean this one kind of falls under circular economy, but if you want to make any changes to your packaging, you will have to also engage with your suppliers on that. Biodiversity. So biodiversity impacts in the supply chain as well, and animal welfare. Um, so if you're a food retailer, for example, and obviously if you're buying animal products or animal products, is the welfare of those animals a priority? They're not being treated cruelly. And then this one here is a one is a one word that's kind of a very big one. And this is kind of a bit of a catch-all in there, but looking outside of the environmental lens and looking more at the social end, um, workers' rights in the supply chain is quite a material issue for a lot of organizations. Now, it does depend on the industry that you're in terms of how high of a risk it is. Like obviously, if you're a clothes retailer that has multiple suppliers dotted around different countries, those countries are maybe less well regulated than say Ireland would be or something like that. Um, this is going to be a higher risk for you versus if you are buying steel off a manufacturer in Sweden. But that's not to say that this isn't something that should be looked at, even if you think that you're safe. Um, Even if you think that there may be no issues in your supply chain. And the reason I'm saying that is that even within Europe, we have instances of, um, say, modern slavery. I know in the UK, Boohoo had a factory that closed down a couple of years ago, because there was instances of that there. But also it doesn't have to be that. So there's the more extreme end of the social things, like there's modern slavery, there's child labor, you say things like that. But then there is also things that are less extreme but still important. So making sure that they are being paid minimum wage and living wage, and making sure that their hours are reasonable. They're not doing 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. Making sure that their working conditions are okay. So whether that's as simple as making sure that they have sanitation facilities, um, or whether that's more extreme as to make sure that they're respected in the workplace and they have good dignity there. Okay, so I'm going to go into supplier engagement kind of approach. So how to scope it out, how to choose the approach that you want to do, and also then look at an example of a real company that's done it as well. Okay, so the starting point I would say for your supplier engagement strategy, um, you want to start off by scoping out your suppliers and scoping out what you need from the engagement. So the first thing I'll say is, what are the material sustainability topics for your company? Um, and what I mean by this is it's hard to go out to suppliers until you have kind of quote unquote your own house in order. And I'm not saying that you need to have everything perfect. And I know engaging with suppliers is part of the process to figure out what is maybe some of the more material sustainability topics for your company. Um, but if you don't have a sustainability, even just framework within your company where you understand here's the material sustainability topics for our organization, and here's the ones that are strategic priority for us, it just means that you're going to end up wasting a bit of time with your suppliers. You might go after data, or you might go after a certain action, and then you might like have to go back in a couple of months later, and you don't want to annoy your suppliers essentially. So I would have a think about strategically in your own company first, having an idea of what sustainability means to you. Then I would say start at what is your starting point. So I think when you're engaging with suppliers, you're normally doing one of two things. You're either looking for data, looking for better quality data, or you're trying to drive change with your suppliers. There is also a piece of just inquiring about what more sustainable products they have. But if we're talking about kind of a bit more sustained engagement with them, it's normally getting good quality data from them, or trying to get good quality data from them, or you're trying to drive change with them. So it might be a case of um, what's your starting point? So what information do you need from your suppliers to make a decision or to meet the goal? So for example, you might want to make a carbon target within the company, you might think our scope 3 data is not great at the minute. We want to engage with our suppliers to get better data so that we feel confident making an emissions reduction target. Or it could be that you've made a emission reduction target, most of your emissions is in your scope 3. We need to engage with our suppliers to uh, drive emissions reduction with them so that we can meet our targets. Um, so be clear on what you want out of the engagement and what the deliverables are to your organization. Um, Goes without saying, but engage with the teams internally who already liaise with the suppliers on a regular basis. So normally that's procurement and operations. Um, they're the ones who are going to be able to help you. They're going to help you be able to profile the suppliers. They're the ones who have all the contacts. They have the actual relationships with the suppliers, so it makes sense to kind of reach out to them um, to be able to do this kind of work. And then also just on another note, like you don't want to step on anyone's toes if they are liaising with suppliers regularly. Rather than you saying, I'm going to reach out to the supplier on this, something could be going on. They could be saying, no, we're in negotiations on price with them. Don't reach out until the contracts are signed. Don't give them leverage. So yeah, you don't want to step on anyone's toes in the organization, but also they are the ones with relationships with the suppliers. So they are the ones who are going to be able to give you the context and help you profile them, and help you understand what's the best way to approach the suppliers as well. Especially that kind of like informal approach of, oh, they're good at getting back, they're not good at getting back, oh, they won't like that. Like, um, yeah, it's buying procurement will know that better than anyone. Um, then profiling, so where your suppliers, what does your supplier base look like essentially? So where are they based? How mature would you expect them to be on this issue? So, um, yeah, for example, the buying steel off a Swedish company, I think I mentioned that as an example a minute ago, but they're probably going to be more mature on carbon accounting data than a small t-shirt manufacturer in Vietnam would be. So how mature would you expect them to be on this issue if we ask them for certain information? How much would we expect them to understand what we're asking, but also to actually be able to give us that information? Is there language barriers? Yeah, so I mean, uh, and again, whoever liaises with suppliers will be able to have talk to you about um how that's kind of dealt with internally anyway. But yeah, is there language barriers with your suppliers? That affects maybe how we need to ask for the data or what data we ask for. And then how much influence do you have? So if you're a very large company and you're one of the biggest customers for your suppliers, you have a lot more influence than a small customer. Even though both have a little bit of influence, because obviously you're the one who's paying your suppliers for the service or for their products. But Tesco can turn around and ask a lot more of their suppliers than maybe some small national supermarket that just has 20 stores within Ireland, because they just have more leverage. They are the biggest customer of a lot of their suppliers. Um, who would you gain the most value out of engaging with? So the 80/20 rule is normally something good that applies here in terms of um, there is a couple of your suppliers that probably have the most impact, and it probably makes the most sense to engage with a smaller group that have a bigger impact. Um, the other thing to think about is like who tends to be open to these kind of engagements, especially if it's your first supplier engagement, who tends to be open to these engagements. And also, the 80/20 rule could be um, that it might be a small number of suppliers who you have the most spend with, or it could be a small number of suppliers that have the most impact environmentally. So it could be a case of, say, if you're a clothes retailer, your suppliers who do the dyeing might have higher carbon impact than other people within the value chain. So you might choose to go with the ones who environmentally are more intensive. Or you might just start off with the biggest spend. And then what are your regular touch points that your team already has with your suppliers as well, and trying to integrate as much as possible into the structures that are already there. Um, so the scoping is very important to start off with, to be able to choose an actual approach to engage with your suppliers. And really what you're trying to figure out is who are our suppliers, what do they look like, what's the best way to engage with them, who do we want to start off with, and most importantly, what actual information do we need from the suppliers, or what goal are we trying to meet by engaging with the suppliers? So then looking at the approach, um, so I've laid it out here in terms of different approaches that you can use to engage with your supplier. And I know I've mentioned before, so a lot of the time when you're engaging with them, you either want data from your supplier or you want to drive change with your supplier. So I'll go through each of them now, but so a starting point for a lot of companies is company surveys. And often, if you're doing a survey with a supplier, you are mainly just looking for data. Um, so what this method is the company just creates their own survey and uh, is say, for example, maybe you want specific cardinal data or you want specific social data. Um, you create a survey yourself internally and you'll send it out to a section of your suppliers. The pros to this is that you get the exact data that you want. The con to this is that firstly, it could be onerous for suppliers. Like if they have multiple requests coming in from customers, if every customer has their own specific survey, that can be quite time consuming for suppliers to deal with. Um, the other thing as well is it's more time intensive for your own company internally. So you have to spend time analyzing that. You have to spend time creating it. Um, yeah, so I suppose it more more exact in terms of the data that you get back, but more time intensive for both sides. And then the cost it is typically quite low because you're creating your own survey there. The next approach then is platforms. And for platforms, basically, I'm going to go to the next slide to explain platforms a bit better, but I will come back to this slide. So a supplier platform is basically a pre-made kind of platform, and it's going to be a third party. And there is loads of them out there, and they all cover like different issues. So, for example, CDP is an investor-led platform or program, where companies will go on and submit primarily climate data, but they do also do water and deforestation questionnaires as well. Um, so this one is it tends to be quite climate focused. SEDEX then is a social platform in terms of kind of worker rights and that thing. So companies will input information about different social issues within the company, but also it will companies can request audits for different factories and suppliers as well. Um, Cascale is one that's used for primarily clothes those in the clothes industry, like clothes retailers, and it's social and it's environmental. Ego Vetus is kind of a catch-all one. It comes up a lot. It does like all of the ESG issues, and you get a score at the end. And same with CDP, you get a score at the end. And then Amphori also does environmental and social. And this is just a couple that I've pulled out just as examples, but there is loads and loads of platforms out there. They all cover different issues. And I suppose the benefit of platforms is that the data is uniform. Um, it also gives you access to data that other companies have requested. So, for example, if you go on SEDEX, um, chance like say all of the bigger companies like Marks and Spencers and all those bigger clothes brands already use SEDEX, and you may have an overlap in suppliers, so they might have already requested those suppliers to put data on the platform. Um, and they may also be like dealing with the request for audits and different things, and then you will get access to that data that they've already requested. So if you're a smaller organization and you have less influence and your suppliers are less likely to engage with you if you ask them for information, finding a platform that is common in your industry and a lot of your suppliers are already on can be useful to kind of streamline the process of getting that data. You can basically just figure out a way to access data that has already been requested from them from your peers. Um, but yeah, platforms can be very useful, but it's important to say that they are only useful if they meet the goal that you wanted in the first place. So if they're asking for information, but it's not quite the right information that you need, it's not much use to you. And the other thing is, obviously, if your suppliers are on it, is the platform that your suppliers are on is the most useful platforms to engage with, or if you have the influence to request them to go on them as well. Um, but yeah, so um, yeah, sorry, the cost of these platforms, obviously it varies depending on the platform. There's a lot of third parties, and normally it depends on the platform itself, but also how many you want to unload it, or yeah, how many people you want to respond to the platform as well. So I put medium to high there. Informal requests is obviously one way you can that you can engage, and that could be asking for specific data, or it could be um, asking them to do a change. And what I mean by informal request is whoever has relationships with suppliers internally, as they're engaging with them on something else, like maybe they're at a trade show, or maybe they're asking them for other information for to put product listing on the website or something like that. They might ask for information ad hoc. Obviously, that's the easiest for the supplier if you're asking them a question kind of very casually at another touch point. Depending on the frequency, like if you're doing it constantly and constantly bombarding them with questions, they might not be it might not be as easy. They might not be as happy with that. Um, but the cons to this one is that there's less structure to it, there's less comparability with it, it's less of a targeted approach. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this unless it's just kind of general inquiry and research. Um, but yeah, the cost is low, obviously, as well. Then you have supplier codes of conducts, and I also said slash contracts. And this is a good one for driving change. So you might have a code of conduct that your suppliers have to sign up to, which I'm sure a lot of companies have in general anyway, or not a lot, but many companies have. But yeah, in your code of conduct, you might have, and it's going to be very broad if it's in your code of conduct. Just it's kind of like generally talking about how you want your suppliers to align to your overall strategy, and then you might get more specific on things that are very important, like making sure that they, like you might have broadly in it, none of our suppliers are allowed to engage in modern slavery or infringing workers' rights, and we sign up to the UN Human Rights Convention. So but it is kind of that broader. You're just basically asking them to sign it to agree that they are on board with it. Contracts are a bit more specific in terms of you can put stipulations in there. Say if you're putting something out to tender, if you're looking for business in the first place, it's easier to kind of bring something into the contract at that stage. Um, and when it comes to contracts, it's probably the most direct way to get what you want, to actually build it into your expectation of the supplier from the first place. Codes of conducts, it's good to kind of set the tone and the policy of what you want from a supplier. Um, but they are that kind of broader strategy approach rather than like very targeted and specific. Um, yeah, but I'd say cons to that. So the code of conduct is very broad. You would still have to do action to follow up to make sure that it's companies are kind of meeting your code of conduct, or suppliers are meeting your code of conduct. And then for contract, the con there would be depending on the supplier, depending on what you're asking for, maybe they might ask for a higher price for certain contract stipulations, but that really depends on your supplier and what you're asking for, I suppose. And then the last one I have in there is collaboration. So for collaboration, um, this is basically working with the supplier to achieve a common goal. And what I mean here is like maybe you're developing a low emissions product together, or maybe you're asking them for a low emissions product that they don't really, they haven't done before, and you're kind of like working with them a little bit in terms of like trying to get that up and running, or maybe you're working with them um to support them moving to renewable energy, or maybe um, collaboration is very, very common if we're looking at the kind of like worker rights social thing, if for very bigger companies, um, having people kind of go in and do different trainings and maybe give more education to the people working within their supply chain. Um, so it's a thing that will probably have the most impact. But on the flip side of that, it's probably more resource intensive as well in terms of your own time, and then also maybe cost as well. So cost, I suppose it depends. I mean, cost always depends with everything. But yeah, time investment is probably a bit higher. Okay, so then I'm going to go through an example. How am I doing for time? Okay, perfect. I'm going to go through this example and then we'll go into Q&A. But yeah, so this is an example. This is Next, the clothing retailer. So starting off with the scoping piece, firstly, they already have a sustainability strategy, so they know the pillars that are important to them strategically to work on. So if we look at it, it's protecting workers' rights in our supply chain. Um, Obviously that's something that would supplier engagement is important for. Tackling climate change, and most of their emissions is in their scope 3. So engaging with suppliers is important there. Responsible sourcing and circularity, and then some of those issues like chemical management, packaging, animal welfare for their leather products. That's they would need to engage with suppliers there. And then the other ones they have is their own workplace. So that's their own workforce. So obviously that's not really supplier engagement. And then supporting communities. So the communities they operate in, kind of doing donations and fundraising. So that would necessarily be supplier based. But three of their five ESG pillars require them to get involved with their suppliers essentially, or is supplier mostly impacted in their suppliers. And then if we talk about source scoping out their suppliers, so you can see here they have a lot of different different suppliers kind of dotted over in a lot of different countries. And there's some countries where they have a heavier spill than others, like say China and Bangladesh and India. But they have a lot. Um, they have a lot of their suppliers are spread out. Okay, so that's the scoping piece with Next. So um, in terms of what they've actually done to uh, engage with their suppliers then. So they have chosen to use a platform, which is probably a good approach for Next because they have a lot of suppliers in a lot of different countries. You have barriers like language barriers for all those different countries that if you were to make your own survey would be difficult, whereas like these platforms can be translated. Um, Also, they can't physically um, uh, go visit all of these suppliers every year because they are obviously in different countries. So having a platform or having something kind of digital makes sense there. Um, the one that they've chosen is called Cascale, and it asks for environmental and social data. So you can see here, 24-25, they onboarded over 1,600 of their tier one final manufacturers and tier three suppliers who produce fabric and operate wet process. Um, and they use the faculty, social, and labor module um, as well. And they got progressive level. So they obviously get scored for doing that. But and they started to work on tier two suppliers as well. So um, yeah, the platform makes sense for them as well because Cascale is, and you would know this if you are working in that kind of clothing industry. As soon as you do research on different platforms, you'll see that Cascale is the one that pretty much all the big clothing companies are using, which means, okay, great. Like some of my suppliers are already going to be on the platform because someone else has asked them to be on it as well. Um, so it's important if you are using a platform, again, to use one that specifically your suppliers may already be on or is common in your industry. So that's how they're getting their environmental data. Um, Also those this platform gives companies kind of different scorings as well, depending on how well they're doing in those environmental and social issues. So in a way, it's also driving change. But they also do a lot of collaboration to kind of with groups in local communities or within those countries, and also kind of third parties that will go in and do different engagements and training. They work with a group that they can workers can bring up issues if they want to and different things like that. So they also this is kind of data focused, but they do a lot of work as well in terms of the trying to create change, particularly socially within the organizations. And then also here, zero discharge of hazardous chemicals. So this they are a signatory to this program, and this program has a lot of different tools. So they work with their suppliers. So here we go. We had over 600 of our textile wet processors signed up to the zero discharge of hazardous waste chemicals gateway as a platform used to share key information. And so accounting for 87% of the product sold within the year. So also on that kind of pollution piece, they are, yeah, sorry, they have their platforms kind of they have their suppliers responding to this platform. So you can see they've got two platforms covering energy, climate, and kind of other environmental issues, so water and different things like that, covering social issues, so workers' rights and supply chain, and then one specifically for chemicals. But I've kind of just taken this as a snippet. If you go into the report, there is a lot of driving change and collaboration and things that they're doing to work with the suppliers as well and try to get them up to standards that they're happy to if they're not at the standard that they
Yeah,
want.
so we'll just move on to the Q&A now. We do have one message in here from Andrew. Why did Next not initially target tier two suppliers?
So I'm just gonna
Yeah, no
make
worries.
sure that I have this right. Tier three suppliers. Yeah, so tier three suppliers are the ones that have the most environmental impact for them. So uh they're the ones who do dyeing and they do wet processes, and it takes a lot of energy to heat up the water, and then you also have to dry the clothes afterwards. So I think they specifically went for the suppliers who had the higher impact environmentally to start off with. Yeah.
Okay, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat as well. We have a few more minutes anyway. I suppose just Grania as well, like with a strategy, obviously strategy is huge. What would be like some, I suppose, quick wins here that businesses could kind of action right away with regards to supplier engagement?
Yeah, I would say the suppliers who are your biggest suppliers who you engage with all the time anyway, um, you're going to have the most impact kind of engaging with them. So that could be three suppliers or it could be 20 suppliers, but focusing on them, I think, is the one that makes the most sense. And then in terms of uh, maybe the engagement that you want, I would say if we're talking data wise, carbon data, energy data is the data that a lot of companies already have, and probably will be able to give you in some kind of form as well. And also just asking in general, um, what um, what they're doing on emissions reduction and what they have in place already. Like you'll find that you might be calculating your emissions, and you might be overestimating. You might find, oh, actually, when we talk to a lot of our suppliers, a lot of them have renewable energy, or a lot of them have like this lower emissions thing that we can incorporate into our model as well. So I think asking for carbon data specifically from like the suppliers you engage with the most, but also asking them what they're doing in the first place, kind of getting a sense of how mature they are with it as well.
Another one there from Andrew as well. Do you see resistance from some suppliers to providing information?
Um, yes and no. So I think it's not normally that the supplier doesn't want to do it because they don't agree with you asking for it. It's often more a resource thing, and they're trying to balance how much time they can give to something versus, and this is bad to say, but how important you are to the business. Like if again, and that's why I'm saying like Tesco has more influence because they're the biggest customer for a lot of their suppliers. If you're a smaller customer of a supplier, it's more of a balancing act. They might be like, we could they might say, oh yeah, okay, well, like you're asking us to do renewable energy, but the investment that takes is less than your business. We don't we don't want to do it. So the resistance is more just that the supplier doesn't want more work for themselves, which it makes sense. But yeah, and the other resistance as well is just that they things like language barriers, things like they don't have a sustainability person dedicated internally who understands what they're asking for as well. So often there's a piece of trying to work with your supplier to educate them in terms of what you're actually asking for, make sure you get good quality data back.
And just in here from class as well, sounds like the strategic supplier trap. Good approach starting with those, but one mustn't neglect finding an effective engagement approach with the rest slash long tail.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I think, and again, depending on your business as well, like you might have 1,500 suppliers and it could be 500 of those are minimal spend. So yeah, I wouldn't um yeah, I would neglect the other ones, but I think it does make sense to start off with where you're going to have the most impact.
Oh, Andrew again. Any tips apart from a platform for a small customer relative to its suppliers?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think now. So platforms. The other thing I'll say is, others in your industry. I don't know what industry you're in, but I try go to kind of sustainability events or networking events within your industry and talk to other sustainability professionals to see how they're engaging with their suppliers. If you're a small customer, um, the more you can duplicate someone else's work and just piggyback off of those, the better. So find out what your peers are doing. Look at their sustainability reports as well for like the big peers that you kind of go after, or sorry, that you look as quote unquote inspiration or whatever it is. But yeah, look at their sustainability reports, see what they're saying in there. And you can kind of see, oh, okay, they're asking for this information, a lot of them. It's probably not going to be unreasonable for us to ask for this information. If platforms are too expensive, like you can do kind of your own engagement with your suppliers and do your own surveys and different things. But I'd say do the research beforehand of what's already being asked for them by them from other people.
If you were to create kind of your own survey and stuff, is there any sort of resources people could look to for, I suppose, examples of that as well?
Yeah, I would say, and like creating your own survey can be as simple as MS Forms or something
Yeah.
like that. Um, I would look at some of the questionnaires from the platforms, like often they'll publicly have like the question somewhere. So if you go onto CDP, you can see you can download the responses from people from last year and you can see the questions that they're asking, or Ecovatus, you can go see their kind of manuals and stuff. So I would take a look at those. You don't, if you're doing your own survey, you don't need to do them as detailed as those. You might only have like 10 questions or something like that.
Mm.
But yeah, look at the ones that are out there. But I think even more importantly is, particularly if you're asking for data, um, think of your end goal first. So if you're like, we want to calculate this, we want this information, like build it from what you want as well.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. We've just gone slightly over the time there, so probably just wrap up. But if anyone has any other questions, you can always reach out to us at ISS and we'll be happy to help there as well. But yeah, thanks for Grania for the insightful presentation. It was brilliant. And I hope everyone got immense value out of it as well. If anyone is interested in training for themselves or training for their organization, be sure to check out our website and the various courses we offer, or if you'd like to get in touch and speak about different learning pathways for you as well, more than happy to do that. We will be sending out the recording of this and the slides. So if you'd like to revisit or share with any of your colleagues, that's absolutely fine as well. But thanks for attending, and we hope you have a great day as well.